my parents did instill in me like a good sense of, you can be whatever you want to be. You can do whatever you want to do, if you work hard enough kind of thing. And I never really like knew what I wanted to do, but I knew I could work hard. They also didn't give me everything I wanted, but they gave me enough that I felt supported that I could do what I wanted, if that makes sense. So this is another thing that's really important to me as a mom. Like I had an allowance as a kid, but it was like pretty small, maybe like $5, something like that. Like it wasn't enough to like do everything I wanted, but it was enough that I could like go buy a soda with my friend or something. But they were always like, well, if you want more, you can get a job. Like we'll help you. We'll take you to the place and get you a work permit. It was like a good balance of always feeling like they had my back, but also like I could have my own back if I wanted more than what they provided for me.
This week, I'm resharing part of my conversation with Arielle Jackson, who is a marketing expert in residence at First Round, which is a venture capital business. She also helps a lot of startups to build their branding and positioning in the early stages. So Arielle had a really incredible background. You're going to hear us talking about some of it. She gained some of her early experience working at Google on Gmail. Then she went over to join Jack Dorsey at Square as one of the early people there. I think she was actually the first female employee, so she helped to shape some of their maternity policies. And then after leaving Square, she joined Cover, which was a very small startup that she helped to build as a part of the early team. And that reached over 1 million users before being acquired by Twitter. So she went back to join Jack there. So you're going to hear us talking about a range of things. We talk about raising kids, how to teach your kids about wealth and gratitude. We talk about how social class can impact your sense of self and the challenge of defining what success really means. Then we start talking about marketing. We talk about the psychology behind our buying choices. We talk about the power of framing and decision making and this ability that great founders have to see the future. And then we talk about career building and when to follow your gut and how to plan effectively to build a career. We talk about the power that early jobs have to be able to shape your career and give you an edge that can compound through the rest of your life. So I think you're going to love this conversation. You can get the full show notes, the transcript, and read my newsletter at theknowledge.io. And you can find Arielle on Twitter at Hi, I am Arielle. I'll have all the links in the description below. You can also check out Arielle's awesome articles in the First Round review, and we'll have the links to that also. Now, if you love this episode, please do share it with a friend, and don't forget to leave a review wherever you listen to podcasts, but particularly Spotify and Apple Podcasts, because it helps us tremendously to find other listeners just like you. And I wanted to know where you grew up. And then we can talk a bit more about your background.
So I grew up in LA, which is actually where I live now. I came home after a while away, but I grew up in LA in this kind of weird neighborhood in West LA that's like between a lot of things, but it's probably closest to this neighborhood called Palms. It's like a kind of normal neighborhood right in West LA.
What was it like growing up there?
It was nice. I went to a private school that actually my son now goes to, which is one of the reasons we moved back to LA in Santa Monica. And so it was interesting being the child of, I was definitely like upper middle class family, but I went to school with a lot of people who were very, very upper class. And so it was interesting being in a world where I didn't have what all those kids had, but I had a lot compared to like most of LA. So it was kind of interesting experience. I think, being a parent at that school now is a whole nother level of interesting. But yeah, we would like drive to Lake Arrowhead for our vacations, and my friends would like fly to Hawaii first class and stuff. So it was an interesting time, but I actually am still best friends with the girl I met her in kindergarten. We're still like best friends.
Do you feel like your kids fit in now more with that cohort than you did when you were growing up?
It's interesting. I mean, I definitely have more as an adult than I did as a child. So I worry a lot about spoiling my children. And it's really important to me to raise them in a way that they understand the privilege that they have. That's like really important to me. In fact, my older son, he's in second grade and he has a lot of friends. Same kind of thing I grew up with, like we're going on a road trip for our summer break and his friends are like flying private to Aspen and stuff. We went over to one of his friends' house. Really nice family, but they live in like a giant house with a trampoline and a zip line in the backyard. And it's super fun to go over there. But, we have a nice house. We live in LA. It's like, we're quite fortunate. But when you have friends like that and you're 8 and you don't really know the difference and you ask your mom and dad, like, why don't we have a house like that and a zip line in our backyard? And it's interesting to navigate those conversations. think it's really important for my older son to know, everyone lives differently. And what's important in your house is that, you have parents who love you, you have food, you have clothes, you can make yourself entertained, you have a brother, like all this stuff that matters, and not like how many Beyblades you have in your collection or whatever. It's interesting as a parent to try to navigate that, even from a place of privilege.
Yeah, I think that's so interesting. What you were saying just reminded me of a memory that I have from when I was a bit younger. So I think probably when I was maybe 13 or 14. So we had just some family friends that I think my dad had gone to school with years and years ago, but we're definitely now not in the same, or at the time anyway, not in the same kind of like social class. And I had gone to their house to go and play, essentially. So we were just like having a get together, but also with a few other friends. And so there was a time we were supposed to get there and we were running late. So I remember we drove up. So we're pulling up to their house. Their house is not even necessarily close to the road. You have to go on this winding path full of like trees and foliage off the main road. And so you pull up to their house and I just saw like a bunch of cars and I was like, oh my gosh, we're so late. And I think I had met him, but I hadn't met anyone else. So I didn't know who else was going to be there. And I, was a bit anxious and I was like, oh my gosh, all these cars are here. We must be so late. And then we get there and we were the first ones there. And all of the cars, all of the cars were his dad's cars. It's funny when you get to see, I guess, I don't know, like a breadth of experiences that different people have. And in some ways, it doesn't necessarily make people any different. Because I think if I hadn't seen that, in terms of my relationship with my friend, first of all, I don't think he necessarily changed, but also I wouldn't necessarily have seen him any differently. But I think when you have that wider context, it maybe changes how you see yourself within that broader spectrum.
Yeah, I mean, kids aren't kids. They just want to play with their friends, right? Like in the end, you just want to play with your friend. You don't really care how many cars his dad has. But it creates an interesting conversation about your place in the world and what you know and what is normal. And you see all these like polls even that say like, have you seen these questions where they're like, what percent of your country do you think makes more money than you? What percent of your country has this degree? What percent? And people are really bad at actually like predicting the truth. And I think that's the kind of warped sense that it gives kids. What percent of the country has 5 cars? And maybe you would think higher after you went to your friend's house, and really he was such an outlier, right?
Yeah, that's a really interesting point that you bring up as well. I think particularly in this age of social media now, it's interesting how widely our baseline gets skewed. And actually, I was just thinking about this earlier. I think because I'm in this weird startup world now, which is very different from the world that I grew up in, and I listen to loads of podcasts and I see loads of people and everyone has these big exits and makes millions and millions. And then I think I saw a story of someone else that had started a business and raised a few million. And it was on Twitter and someone was commenting about, whoa, how much this is. Oh my gosh, this is like generational wealth. And I felt bad, but my first reaction was like, oh, that's not huge compared to some of the rounds that you see. Like that's just a valuation of, I think it was maybe like 15, 17 million. And that was not necessarily the main point. The point was someone commenting about how huge a number that was. And of course, that is so true. Like 17 million pounds, actually, which is probably like over $20 million, is a
$20 million,
huge
yeah.
amount. Yeah, for anyone, that's a colossal amount. And that is generational wealth. But in my mind, the first reaction that came to my head is like, are you not overreacting? This is not huge compared to working in tech, seeing tech multiples all the time, where every day, if your seed round doesn't start with more than 2 million, then it's almost like you're a failure. And I think at the company that I work at, we just did a Series C. It was about 128 million. So again, you very quickly just have this skewed perception of what success looks like and what wealth or money or privilege or any of these things can look like.
Yeah, I mean, it happens with everything, right? Like even I was thinking about like a kind of dumb example, but like with coffee, right? Like if you were into coffee and, I used in high school, I would like get a Starbucks latte once in a while. I thought it was amazing. And now it's like, oh, Starbucks, like, it's not that great. Like you go after, like, if you're going to spend money on coffee, go for like a really good coffee. And so like kind of what the bar for what good is shifts. And then the more you drink good coffee, the more you're like, oh, I can't. That Starbucks latte, I'll have it in the airport if I have to, but it's not special to me anymore as it once was.
Yeah, no, you're completely right. And I think even what we were just saying reminds me of just in general how bad we are at baselining things. So in my newsletter, I was writing about how bad we are at calculating odds, for example, like the odds of flipping a coin and getting consecutive heads. Most people would think, like, if you were betting on whether it would be heads or tails, if you had to flip a coin 5 times, people's automatic assumption is that coincidences are rare and it's not going to be heads several times in a row. If it's been heads twice, it's probably going to be tails next time. So if you've seen 2 heads, you're going to switch. But actually, it's actually almost technically more likely that it will be another heads. And so it's almost better if you had to pick 10 coin flips, you just pick one thing and stick with it the entire time, because the odds of each successive coin flip is equally likely. So anyway, I know I just went off on a rant, but the point is just in general how bad we are at baselines. And it makes me think about, I don't know, psychologically it's really interesting. And I'm interested in your perspective because I was just listening to Rory Sutherland on a podcast. And I think actually you
Love
just
him.
tweeted something from Ogilvy recently, and Rory Sutherland works
Yeah,
at
I love,
Ogilvy.
he's amazing. I'm excited to hear what you heard him talking about. It's amazing.
No, so many things. I couldn't even summarize everything that I just learned from listening to him. But I think the main thing is just how easily, first of all, the massive connection between marketing and psychology in the brain, and also just how easily we can be skewed by certain things. So I think the first thing that comes to mind is Coke. Coke got in a lot of trouble quite a few years ago now. They wanted to have these vending machines where during the summer, the cost of a Coke would increase when it was hot. So based on the temperature, the cost of a Coke would start rising. Whereas if they had done it the other way and said, when it's cold, a Coke will be cheaper, and just had a higher baseline price, no one would have a problem with it. And so it's interesting how, again, this idea of having baselines, and I know that's a big idea in marketing, it skews our perspective of what value is.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, framing is sort of the psychological, I guess, terminology for that. So if you think that the Coke costs $1 and in the summer it's going to be $1.50, you think like, oh, they're ripping me off. But if the Coke always costs $1.50 and you're primed and framed to think $1.50, and now in the winter it's $1, you feel like you're getting a deal. It's the same exact economic situation. So I studied psychology. I studied human biology in school, and then I did a master's in psychology. I almost became a clinical psychologist. And when I was doing that, I took this class on social psychology. Robert Cialdini was a visiting professor that year, just happened to be. And so I heard he wrote that book Influence, which is like, I think that's like his #1 bestseller. And I think he was teaching in Arizona at the time, but he became like a visiting professor. And I got to hear like one lecture from him about social psychology and influence. I remember being like, this is so awesome. I want to do this. Like, this is what I want to do. And it was that intersection of how the brain works and how humans work in group mixed with persuasiveness in business that I thought was like so cool. And I remember just like, it was one of those like eyes light up moment as a student. And I think it's pretty cool, like a roundabout way, but I kind of in some ways get to do some of that now. And, psychology is really, really connected to marketing in a lot of ways. And I think, Rory Sutherland, his book Alchemy was one of like probably my favorite books I read last year, but he is like the godfather of this too. It's like another one of these guys who just really applies things from behavioral economics and psychology and applies it to great examples in branding and in policy, and really shows you how things like, the Coke example, it's the same economic output, but people feel so differently about it. So it changes their behavior. I'm like fascinated. I nerd out on all that stuff all the time. It's so fun.
Yeah, same. I think another great example was, and again, it's just so incredible how, like you say, changing the framing completely changes how you think about something. So right now I don't pay for TV at all, just because I pay for all these streaming services. And I think, what's the point of paying extra for TV on top of that? Just because by the time you pay for Netflix and Disney and Amazon Prime Video and all of those things, there's enough to watch. I'm fine. But he was talking about how he convinced his dad to get Sky Sports, like the equivalent of ESPN here. And essentially it was quite expensive. But then he was like, oh, but how much do you spend on a newspaper? You spend 20p on a newspaper. Actually, Sky Sports, even though it's however much for the month, it's actually 67p a day. And, the equivalent value that you get from being able to watch this compared to how much you spend on newspapers, it's actually very economical. And so it's a really weird framing thing, because in my mind, if you told me the top level price, I would be like, whoa, that's way too expensive. I don't need to spend that. But actually, when you break it down like that, and even when I think about all the other things I probably spend 67p a day on, that just in my day-to-day life, it's less than a coffee, it's less than almost anything else you can buy. If the marginal value you get from it is more than that, then suddenly it's a great idea.
It's a great way to take things that seem expensive and make a reference point to something you already do. And there's some nice examples in marketing too, like that example that Rory Sutherland, I think that was in his book too. And he was trying to get his dad was in a retirement home or something, right? And he was like trying to get him stuff to do. Another example, just of like a high price point item that does that framing to like a daily cost is the snoo. Do you know about the snoo? It's like this, basically like a tech enabled cradle for babies. So it's a smart cradle. Think about it like that, like a bassinet. And you put your newborn in it and it rocks and it shushes the baby. And it's based on this pediatrician. His name's Dr. Harvey Karp. And he came up with this book, The Happiest Baby on the Block. And there's these 5 S's. And it's like what you do when you have a newborn who's like inconsolable. It's shushing, sucking, side lying, whatever. There's like 5 of them. Okay. And he invented this cradle that does this for you. And it's like connected to an app. It's very expensive. It's like $1,500 or something for this cradle. And usually you can buy a little bassinet for, I don't know, $100, something like that. Like it's like 10x or more than a regular cradle. But they've done a lot of analysis on it and like actually published in, scientific pediatric journals, and showed that it actually increases his goal, his like purpose for the company is to increase babies' health through better sleep, and then to also increase families' health because there'll be less, his theory is like less postpartum depression and all of that if moms actually slept more too. When the cradle first came out, they were talking about it as $5 a day because you could rent it. So I rented one for my second kid. I never bought, I wasn't around for my first kid. And he said for less than the price of a latte per day, you can get, I think it was like 2 hours more of sleep. It's like, oh, okay, well now it's worth it. But like at $1,500 compared to the bassinet that's $100, $150, that seemed nuts to me. Like I would never spend 10x for a cradle, but I spend $5 on a latte. And yes, I would pay that for 2 hours more sleep per day.
Hey, we'll get back to the episode in just one moment, but I wanted to tell you very quickly about my newsletter. I started sharing everything I was learning online, and a few thousand people came along for the ride. I send 3 regular emails. Brainwave fortnightly on a Tuesday, which is about the intersection between technology, philosophy, and psychology. Then every week on a Thursday, I send Revelations, and that's about creativity and productivity. And then finally, every other weekend, I send Wayfinder, and that's about decision making. So people in the audience actually send me really tough problems that they're working through, and I help to deconstruct them using mental models and decision making frameworks. So if you'd like to subscribe, you can join me and over 20,000 incredibly driven people at theknowledge.io. Okay, back to the episode. That's incredible framing. And it's so right. Not too long ago, a friend of mine had twins, and I am a godfather to them. And I remember the early months where you're spending time with them and trying to help. It's a lot of work. And just thinking about what you just said, suddenly that sounds like crazy value. Even though, like you say.
My sister-in-law had a baby. Literally less than a month ago. And, she's calling saying, like, well, maybe he's not sleeping. What am I doing wrong? Like, well, that's really normal, but you could consider this snoo. And she's like, but it's so expensive. Well, you can rent it. And she gets the $5 lattes too. And when you kind of, I'm using that line now, it's good marketing when you kind of, the people who endorse the product are actually saying that. That's really well framed. So when I explained it to her like that, she's like, okay, I'll try it. I can always return it if it doesn't work. But yeah, in those early days, you'll spend whatever you want, whatever. You could get someone to spend whatever, especially with twins, right?
Yeah, exactly. I was going to say it's incredible how certain brands manage to integrate themselves into our lives. So I know that one, in some ways I am deeply ashamed of, and in some ways I don't care, and I'm also very proud, is Superhuman. And I think this is a great example because I think they did some work with you. I am just so unapologetically, I love Superhuman, and I will convince people to get it. And I get nothing out of it. I'll talk about it all the time just because it's so good and it works. And the best and worst thing about it is it's so hard to explain to someone. I sound like I'm convincing people to join a cult, but to the uninitiated, it's so hard to explain and to quantify the value that you get. All I can say is that it's fast. And I know that's what they want me to say because that's all they message, but it's true. It's really fundamentally true. And I don't have metrics to back it up. I don't have anything else but the product experience that you have that this is just faster and easier and better, and everyone should be doing it that way.
Yeah. Superhuman's an interesting one. Actually, at first round recently, I don't even know if I think we can probably say this. First round led their seed round. And I worked with Rahul really early on some of that messaging. Anyway, I'm not a convert yet, but recently First Round sent an email that's like, we're rolling out Superhuman for all of our employees. And like, we encourage you to get it. But I'm still so loyal to Gmail for having worked on Gmail many years ago. So it's funny, like, I know people love Superhuman and I totally see the value in it. And I guess maybe someday I'll make the switch, but I'm going to be one of those late adopters because I'm still like into Gmail. It just like seems second nature to me at this point.
I mean, I guess if you've worked on it and spent so long, you probably know a bunch of the Gmail secrets that the rest of us don't. But I genuinely think that part of it was it's a paradigm shift of how I had previously thought about email. So I still remember I had over 19,000 emails at the time that I signed up for Superhuman. And I wasn't necessarily looking for a new email. A friend of mine had just got it and she referred me and she was like, oh, try it if you want. And what they do, as you will know, is that they book you in for a live session and someone is going to walk you through the whole white glove experience of showing you the product. And even during it, I was like, yeah, not necessarily buying it. I think it was just the paradigm shift of a bit like Apple in a way, forcing you to make decisions and forcing you to think of your thing the way they think of your thing. Because so I used to use Android, now I use an Apple, but I used to hate the constraints that Apple has where they tell you can only do things one way. This is the only way to do it. This is the best way to do it. We don't care if you want to do something else. Once you do it our way, you will understand it's the best way. And I hated it at first, and now I get it. And now I trust that the fact that they say there's only one way they want to do it is because they have a high bar of quality for doing it that way, rather than giving you loads of choices and with varying levels of quality. And I think with Superhuman, compared to using a bunch of other email stuff that I've tried, they do one way really right. And if you do it their way, then it works. Don't try to do any other thing. It's not for that. It's for doing things in this way. You triage your email like this. I just remember the feeling of, in my head, I was saving email because what if I need it one day? And I wasn't thinking of the fact that there was over 19,000 of them. I was just thinking of hoarding and, what if I need this? What if I need to refer to this? And I do. Like just the other day, I had to refer to an email from 2015. Sometimes it's useful. But I think just sweeping everything under the carpet, I think going through that onboarding experience, but I think it goes to marketing in general and the way that you can frame a certain view of the world and get customers to buy into it. I wrote about this as well, but I was thinking about Mike Maples Jr., who is a VC and he's really awesome and he has a podcast. And what he was talking about is the way that great founders are like time travelers and they bring people into the future and they are able to position this framing of a future world and bring you into it. They're not building something for right now and trying to iteratively convince you to change from what you're doing to something else.
Yeah, it's interesting because when Gmail first launched, one of the ideas was like everyone who worked at Google got a ton of email. We sent a lot of email. We got a lot of email, both in our personal lives and our work lives. And the belief of what the future would be like is in the future, everyone's going to be like this. We're just on the bleeding edge of it. And so the AOL or Hotmail or Yahoo account you have where you get like 2 or 4 or 6 megabytes and you have to delete your messages in order to get more wasn't going to work. That's just not the way the world was going. And so at Google, Gmail was built as an email product for people who got a ton of mail. And Superhuman was built for power Gmail users, right? There were the people who got all the extensions, and Rahul had built some of those extensions in the past. And I'm one of those like power Gmail users, keyboard shortcuts and the undo send extensions and all of that stuff, schedule emails for the future, all these bells and whistles that like if you're a power Gmail user, you can kind of make Gmail work for you. But he said, what if we just rebuilt email for just the super duper power users? And what would that look like? And so the idea that a lot of great founders do that, you either take something that exists and there's a very top % of the market, like that you're building for power users, and you build a better product that meets their needs. And sometimes you have to force them into doing things one way. Or you take something that is hard, that very few people are doing, and you make it much more accessible and everyone can do it. So Superhuman's definitely an example of that. Like, let's serve the power user. Let's build something even better for them. We can charge for it. We can create this beautiful onboarding. We can make it super fast, but really build a product for power users again. Like the power users had shifted. The power users in 2006, 2007 look really different than the power users in 2022.
Yeah, you're completely right. And I think the other part of the reason that I brought it up is because the pricing is ridiculous and somehow they make me do it anyway because there's no other world in which I could imagine paying.
What is it, $30 a month or something?
Yeah, $30 a month,
Yeah.
which sounds crazy. And
But then if you frame it as like, if you had to hire a virtual assistant or an actual assistant, $30 a month is actually like super cheap.
yeah, exactly. So I know we skipped a few steps. Let's go back. You were mentioning with your career, for example, coming out of university, you had the guest lecture with Robert Cialdini. Was that the first time you'd considered doing marketing, or was that something that was already maybe a twinkle in your eye before then?
I think I didn't really know that it existed, to be honest. I was always kind of somebody who was interested in business as a kid. Like I was the kid with the lemonade stand and the garage sale. My parents had this giant box of change that I think they had inherited from one of their parents. Like it was a huge cardboard box, tons and tons and tons of coins. And they used to tell me that if I rolled the coins, 'cause I was like, 6 years old, if I rolled the coins and took them to the bank, I could keep half the money. And I would do that. I was always babysitting. I had a job. I got a work permit when I was 15. I worked at a clothing store on the weekends. Like I was always kind of industrious and I always liked to work. I like to work and I like to make money. Like that was always something that I liked to do. But I never really thought of like, well, what does that mean for a career? So I think I always thought like, well, I'm interested in science. I'm interested in psychology. Maybe I'll go be a clinical psychologist. I taught preschool for a little bit while I was in grad school. Kind of just like dabbled in a lot of things, but I never really thought of marketing as a career. I guess when I was deciding if I wanted to do a PhD or not, I realized like that's 7 years of research, 7 years of research on a really esoteric topic that like 3 people in the world care about. When I was doing my master's and I was researching the understanding and display of emotion in preschool children and cultural differences in it. It was an interesting topic, but like 5 people in the world cared. And it took me a year to publish like one thing, And I didn't like how slow it was. That was sort of it was like 7 more years of this. I don't know, like fewer and fewer people are going to care. And I wanted something that would move faster. And so I got 2 jobs, basically. This was 2002, I guess, that I would have been applying to jobs. It was not a good time to be looking for jobs. I guess I was deciding between doing that PhD or working. And the 2 jobs I had one was in a psych lab at Stanford, like as a research coordinator type person, kind of continuing on what I was doing, but as a job rather than as a student. And the other one was like an entry level thing at Google. I literally couldn't decide what to do. It was a really hard choice and ended up taking the job at Google just because of that slow pace of research. And I was like, well, Google will move faster. So that's kind of how I just started in like a really entry level job there and kind of fell into marketing and I guess didn't look back or did look back, but it kind of all worked out in the end.
That's really interesting. I'm interested to know what your parents did for work and maybe where your early sense of industriousness came from.
Yeah. So my dad's a pediatrician. He sees babies and kids, and he's one of those people who like loves his job. He's been doing the same. He's in private practice. So, I mean, he runs a small business. He has maybe like 15 people work there, something like that. But he's not very like business minded. He's kind of like, I like seeing my patients and he gets joy out of it. He's made a good living, but he didn't he wasn't really motivated by that. My mom is a therapist. She was the director of a preschool for kids with autism, high functioning autism for the most part. So she specialized in family therapy for kids who were intellectually normal or even gifted, but socially having issues. That was kind of her thing. So a lot of our dinner table conversations were about like kids and health and families and all of that. Now I joke my parents are like professional grandparents. So we moved back to LA when I was pregnant with my second son. And when my husband and I go out, we leave my 2 little boys with a child therapist and a pediatrician, and they're in good hands. They're really good grandparents. My mom is also not very like business savvy or interested in business. I mean, she now runs a little private practice. She does mostly Zoom therapy. She retired from the job at the school. I honestly don't know where it came from. I think maybe it was that my parents did instill in me like a good sense of, you can be whatever you want to be. You can do whatever you want to do, if you work hard enough kind of thing. And I never really like knew what I wanted to do, but I knew I could work hard. They also didn't like give me everything I wanted, but they gave me enough that I felt supported that I could do what I wanted, if that makes sense. So this is another thing that's really important to me as a mom. Like I had an allowance as a kid, but it was like pretty small. I don't remember what it was, maybe like $5, something like that. Like it wasn't enough to like do everything I wanted, but it was enough that I could like go buy a soda with my friend or something. But they were always like, well, if you want more, you can get a job. Like we'll help you, we'll take you to the place and get you a work permit, that kind of stuff. So it was like a good balance of always feeling like they had my back, but also like I could have my own back if I wanted more than what they provided for me.
I think that's so important to have. And funnily enough, I think even for me, it's something that I probably underestimated that I got from my dad, which is probably ended up being one of the most valuable things, is because I genuinely think, like you say, that births a sense of industriousness where you are willing to go out and create things for yourself. And I think even just believing that things are possible and believing that you can work hard and achieve things and you can go out and do things, whatever it is such a critical thing that a lot of people just unfortunately don't have.
Yeah, that's one of the things going back to what we were first talking about like entitlement in private school and going to an environment where kids are given everything by their parents. I remember like when I was 16, I wanted a car. And a lot of my friends' parents were, giving them a hand-me-down car or buying them, a little car. And my parents were like, we're not going to buy you a car. Part of it was like they probably couldn't. And part of it was they wanted me to work for my own car. And I ended up saving, I think it was $1,500. And I ended up buying like a 1983 Volvo, 240 DL that belonged to my photography teacher in high school. She was getting a new car and like mentioned she had this old beater that she would sell to me for $1,500. So I saved up the money and bought it. And I was so proud of that car. Like it was such a big achievement to have bought your own car at 16. And it was a solid car. I've pretty much had a Volvo ever since.
No, but that's a massive achievement, particularly if you're not getting like a massive allowance. You actually have to work for it. And from 15 as well. What were you doing for work at the time?
My friend's mom owned a little clothing store and I worked Sundays at the clothing store. It was mostly like a kid's clothing store, just a little like boutique. And I babysat I think that was mostly it at that point. Yeah, 15, 16.
Yeah. But again, I think some of those early working experiences, again, I think it's one of those things we probably underestimate. They have such a massive impact on just your ability to fit in with people, work with people. I think when you start working, and I'm going to ask you in a second about your early days at Google, but I was just thinking about my early days in corporate law. So I'd already been working for a little bit at this point, but now I'm in my quote unquote dream job, working at one of the biggest law firms in the world, and it's all great. And I remember like joining, and I have been working for so many years to get to this point, even though age-wise we're probably similar with some other people, but I've just been working since I was like 15, 16. And there was another person in my cohort that actually I think they joined 6 months after me, but technically it's the same cohort. But this was their first job. They just never worked before. And I just can't imagine never having to work, never having to do anything. You don't know how to interact with people in the workplace. You're figuring out everything for the first time on this kind of stage. I don't know if I could have coped with that, but I think having all of that experience just in being industrious, in trying things, in learning things, getting some things wrong, just helps in whatever context it is. Even if you're just putting mail through people's letterboxes, I think it's all useful.
Yeah, it's totally useful. And even to know, part of it was dealing with hard situations. Like I had a few hard situations, even as a 15-year-old in that clothing store. But like hard situations, how to navigate things independently, even customer service, like facing different people who have different needs, who are mean to you sometimes. I don't know, like I've worked as a hostess in a restaurant. That was another thing I did in high school. I worked as a barista in college, getting those kind of jobs early on. I asked my son, what do you want to be when you grow up? And now, just like every other 8-year-old, he wants to be a YouTuber, is what he calls it, like a YouTube content creator. I'm like, oh gosh, like if he starts that at, 15, 16 and doesn't ever have the like barista job or the, restaurant job, I think they're going to miss some interpersonal world skills. But yeah, I think it's way easier to go into your first post-university job having had 5 other jobs first, as opposed to just like going in cold.
Yeah, those are genuinely the best jobs. I can't imagine, if when I have kids, that they have to do those jobs. Just even if you do it for a summer, like any kind of serving job or a sales job. I remember doing so many of these random sales jobs where either you're like, whether it's for a charity or for a company, like doing door-to-door stuff, just raising money for charities in the street, doing things indoors, all of that, like sales. And then this actually led to when I was working in advertising as well. I think all of that is working with people and dealing with the different facets of human personalities. And like you say, sometimes people will be mean. Sometimes they will act like they hate you for no reason. They've just met you. But then on the other hand, So I can give you an example of when I was in this really bad sales job, probably one of the worst jobs that I've had. It was like really this slightly shady sales company where pretty much every day, so a working day was like 7 till 7, you start at 7 and you're doing door-to-door sales, but you're selling a different thing every day and you don't even know what you're going to be selling until you get to the office, and then they tell you, okay, this is the thing for today. I don't know if it's shady or anything, but I think the company was just very not always forthcoming with the details and stuff. But it's fine. Like sometimes you're raising money for a charity, sometimes you're selling something to people, and they will also send you to a different area of the city every day. So you just have to, so that's the reason you start at 7, so that by the time you get to where you're going, it's 9. So yeah, they just send you off to some part of the city. They give you the details about what you're raising money for today or what you're trying to sell today, and then you just have to go. You just have to go knock on people's doors. You have to find a way to sell as much as possible, and it's all commission based. I also remember at the time I didn't have much money. I think I was at university at this time, so I didn't have a lot of money, so I didn't want to be spending money on lunch. So my trick was to find someone that would invite me in to eat. And so that was like my North Star metric. That was the ultimate goal. And so I was, obviously you're being nice to people, but you're also trying to like, oh, do you want to come in for some tea? Oh, of course. Why not? And then while you're there, then you also make the sale. That's the double whammy.
So that's like improv, sales improv, right?
Yeah, exactly. But I think it just teaches you great interpersonal skills. It's the same with serving or doing any service job.
Well, some of it also is learning what you don't want to do. Like my son's doing this project at school right now, and he's learning about what it takes to open a restaurant. And one of the things they're teaching them is you have to write like a little paragraph about like, should you pay minimum wage or should you pay a fair wage? And what is the difference? And what if you're, they're teaching them about like margin on he's opening a dessert restaurant. One of the dads in the class owns a restaurant and comes in and talk to them about stuff. And anyway, they're learning all. So the homework last night, he got sent home with a stack of papers to fill out. And the teacher had sent an email about this already. And she said, today we're sending them home with their government paperwork. We're trying to teach them that some work is not fun and that work can be tedious sometimes, but you have to do it anyway. And the work was like, they had made up government paperwork where you literally just had to fill in like your home address, your phone number, your school address, your school phone number on like 10 different forms, like manually by hand, just to show them like, and one said like permit for work permit. One was like restaurant permit. They had named all of it, but it was literally just copying and pasting your address on. And the last page was like, did you enjoy the work? Did you find it challenging? Like reflecting on the experience. And it was funny because like the lesson was supposed to be some work is tedious and you have to do it anyway. It's not fun, but it's a cost of doing business and getting to do what you really want, which is to open this restaurant. And the question said, like, did you enjoy the work? He was like, yes. And I was like, oh gosh, I kind of lost the point of this. But I like that they're teaching them that even at a young age.
Thank you so much for tuning in. Please do stay tuned for more. Don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe. It really helps the podcast. And follow me on Twitter. Feel free to shoot me any thoughts. See you next time.